Okay.
Hi,
I'm Howard Weil, Director of the Center for Economic Development here at UIC, and it gives me great pleasure this afternoon to introduce some friends of QEd, two of the first people I ever met in Chicago, even before I officially started working here, Erica Swinney and Bill Vogel. And QEd has also worked with their organization, Manufacturing Renaissance, since I got here. We partnered on QEd's report last year on the manufacturing job multiplier and are planning future work. The organization, Manufacturing Renaissance, was founded here in Chicago in 1983, originally as the Midwest Center for Labor Research. And they were one of the leading organizations in the first wave of local manufacturing support efforts focused around the retention of good manufacturing jobs in the region back in the 1980s. And now, as Manufacturing Renaissance, they're in the forefront of today's strategies for expanding the number of good manufacturing jobs in the Chicago area and elsewhere in the country. Manufacturing Renaissance is a very unique organization in a number of ways. Among economic development organizations, they are one for which manufacturing has always been central to their vision of economic development. They are concerned both with retaining and expanding good manufacturing jobs, and also with connecting low and moderate income people to them, something a combination that you don't often see in one organization. They work with both unions and companies. They originally they have strong ties to the labor movement, but also have the trust of companies. That's a very unusual combination. And they have been known for their many innovative practices, including creating the Austin Innovation Park on the far west side of Chicago, creating the Austin Polytechnical Academy, one of the nation's leading manufacturing-focused public high schools, and most recently in spreading practices by creating manufacturing renaissance councils, not only here in Chicago, but in other large metropolitan areas and some small ones all over the country. They are really an organization that shares QEd's vision of manufacturing as critical to high road economic development. So let me briefly introduce Erica and Bill. Erica Swinney has worked for Manufacturing Renaissance as program director serving Austin Polytech. She's responsible for developing and managing Austin Polytech's manufacturing career program, which includes over a dozen career preparation activities, and she also works closely with the students on a variety of leadership programs related to careers, entrepreneurship, and community and economic development. Bill Vogel has been in manufacturing for more than 50 years. In the midst of his career, he parlayed his business knowledge into purchasing his own manufacturing company, Ducati. Subsequently, after volunteering at Austin Polytech, he joined the Manufacturing Renaissance staff and became Austin Polytech's industrial coordinator, the liaison between Austin Polytech and Chicago area manufacturers. So again, it's a great pleasure to introduce Erica and Bill. Unfortunately, I will have to leave for another meeting, but I hope to be back before their presentation.
Thanks so much, Howard. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. It's an honor for us to be here. It's a pleasure for me to talk a little bit about where we've come from and sort of our approach to the work that we're doing, and some of both how we've defined some of the issues over the years and what solutions, or how we felt we could be part of the solution to some of those issues. So, in our experience, and even to this day, this is most people we come in contact with think manufacturing looks like this, or that looks something like this, or it's all gone to China. And the end. That's what United States manufacturing is But the reality is American manufacturing is alive and well. And right now it's one of the most productive sectors of our economy. It's still very much the backbone of our economy. Average compensation in the field is $75,000 and change, including benefits and whatnot. And nationally, there's about 600,000 jobs currently available in these manufacturing-related fields. In the Chicagoland area, the number is around 30,000. So these are significant, important, well-paying jobs that are still a really important part of our economy. And in fact, a lot of factories today look like this. This is actually a picture of Winsler Gear on the north side, which is one of our partners. So U.S. manufacturing is here, but the reality is at risk. Over the last decades, it really has shifted to more complex high value added, high precision production. And we have found, both through research as well as anecdotally all the time, that there is in fact a shortage of skilled labor. And what we have identified and described over the years is also a huge disconnection from our education system to the current needs and opportunities in the manufacturing sector today. And then we also know very well how much, nearly half of the U.S. manufacturing workforce is over the age of 45. So this is a really timely issue for us to be addressing. And so this question really frames the work of manufacturing renaissance over the last 30 years. Essentially, do we accept, because that was the idea, the mentality of the time, even then, of like, well, even though it was clearly devastating to communities, not only in Chicago, but across the United States, there was almost a resignation of, well, that's just how it is, manufacturing going the way of the dinosaur. And we really started our organization sort of asking the question, is that, well, I mean, is it inevitable? We didn't think that was a reality that was set in stone, and we didn't really know what the factors really were, and so we really started to kind of asking that question, is there something that could be done? Because we know how critical it is to our communities, our middle class, working class communities. And so for the last 30 years, we've sort of really been in the trenches of trying to answer this question, is manufacturing viable? And if so, how can we sort of not only retain jobs, but also create manufacturing jobs? And so the first decade of our work was really around publishing the Labor Research Review, which was a publication. It's no longer current, but it's in the archives. I think it's Cornell University still has it in the archives. And then a lot of this work, because really took us in and around the Austin community on the west side of Chicago, as well as the south side. And actually one of our most sort of seminal campaigns was around the Brock Candy Company, which is on Cicero and Lake. The shell still exists today on a sort of 26-acre lot, and we learned a lot not only about this one company that happened to have 4,000 direct jobs, but also 7,000 indirect jobs in the broader supply chain, the broader community. And even after it closed, we were able to study the effects of that closure through things like everything from the obvious stuff like unemployment rate in a given area, but also the other sort of symptoms of domestic violence, drug abuse. I mean, what were these other indicators that were sort of symptoms of this? So that's just an example of sort of the kinds of insights we've been able to gain over the years. And so some of the stuff that we really learned over engaging in a lot of this work was that we believe now that 80% of the closings that happened and the job losses really could have been prevented. And the reason these companies closed wasn't because they were inherently no longer producing viable goods or marketable products, that these closures were results of predatory business strategies, short-term, profit gains, and, huge ownership succession was a huge challenge. Actually, talking with Howard earlier, we're looking about updating a research that we did probably about 15 years ago that really looked at, that surveyed companies that were at risk of closing, and we found that 40% of companies who were at risk of closing were only in risk because of lack of a successor. And then as time is going on and most of the companies were really embracing things like technology and robotics, the issue of the pressure of not finding enough employees to sustain business became increasingly more of a pressure on these types of companies. We did this report in a partnership with the Chicago Federation of Labor and the Department of Labor did a big study looking at career paths in Cook County in manufacturing. And this is when we really first described in detail that today's advanced manufacturing sector needs an advanced workforce. Part of that study was also looking at, well, if these companies need all these workers, where does one get the training for these skills? And so we did a survey of the public education system. We looked at Chicago Public Schools, we looked at city colleges, we looked at the nonprofit training providers, and found that there was really a non-system. That at that point in time, for example, Chicago Public Schools had pretty much long since closed a lot of their vocational programs that were related to manufacturing, and the few that exist were really in name only. They were essentially antiquated hobby shops. They really, what students were learning in these classes were not consistent with the needs of industry. So a kid could take a shop class, but not really learn anything that marketable to allow them to get an actual job in manufacturing. Same with city colleges. Our technical consultant who did that part of the research for us compared Chicago city colleges to a rural high school program, you know, in terms of the few programs that existed. So, and even nonprofit training providers weren't really carrying their weight either as part of this. So we described really this non-system, and that in fact, this problem was so huge that we knew in order to fix it would require essentially a 20-year vision for a career path and workforce development and education between secondary to post-secondary and beyond. But we were also highly influenced by international best practice. I mean, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with Mondragon in Spain. This is a region in the northern area of Spain, in the Basque region. You know, a minority community, completely devastated because of war in that case. But you had a priest, Arizmendi, who was assigned to this community, had a vision for a way to rebuild the community by starting a technical school, by educating youth in skills in engineering and manufacturing so that they can build manufacturing businesses. And that's exactly what happened. He started a school. The graduates of the school started, or actually bought a manufacturing company, a small manufacturing company, chose to run it as a cooperative, a worker cooperative, was successful. Because the purpose of this business existing was to rebuild the community, profits were reinvested back into the community, and essentially that business became the seed that now Mondragon exists today as Mondragon Cooperative Corporation that employs, that's a network of over 100 companies employing over 100,000 people. They started banks, they started universities, it has one of the lowest unemployment rates. They're on the cutting edge of the Spanish industrial economy. Anyway, so it's a fantastic example. Another great example is around in Emilia-Romagna. We learned about how the government worked closely with small businesses to foster manufacturing and economic development. And this was for us a great example of the important role that government can and in fact probably should play in helping small businesses in particular compete in the global economy. So this wasn't just a, hey, here's some subsidies. It's like, what infrastructure can we help support that allow you to be successful today in the international economy? Another huge sort of inspiration for us was looking at Germany and Denmark, the school system in there in particular. And this is where we saw, this is in terms of the role of education as a driver in wealth creation. And they have, a sophisticated sort of workforce development education program that really has a clear paths into a variety of professions, the use of national skills standards and credentials, and as well as we saw great examples of these partnerships where it wasn't taboo for labor and business to work together on projects. It was sort of a given because they felt like, well, you have to get all the stakeholders at the table. Otherwise, if you try and do anything that is of scale, you don't want somebody else undercutting because they just weren't at the table to begin with. So it was sort of like a no-brainer for them, and for us it was really a powerful sort of inspiration. So at the sort of a culmination of all this sort of, experience and research and work and, surprise, manufacturing really matters. And we feel very strongly that it's actually in fact required to have any sense of a sustainable society. We feel it's the only sector that can build a large middle class, and we feel it's the only sector that can actually dramatically reduce poverty. And as I've kind of already indicated, we're talking about high-wage careers, the idea of the multiplier effect. So this is a sector where for every one manufacturing job created, there's 5 other jobs created in the broader economy. So even though manufacturing as a sector employs less people directly, it creates an economic activity that ripples throughout the entire economy that is really important. Whereas like retail sector, for example, for every retail job, it only creates a job and a half. And I think some, like a Walmart job, actually creates negative jobs in the broader economy. So of course, these are businesses that create a tax base, and this is also a key wealth creation strategy. Also, it really creates this unique opportunity for a high level of common interest between the private and public sector. What it now has created is conditions that require a higher level of education for everybody in our society. These are the kinds of jobs that actually build sort of social fabric during work. I mean, these are the kinds of jobs, as opposed to the old school assembly line. Now it requires teamwork, it requires creativity, it requires using a lot of problem solving skills, communication skills. So these are the kinds of jobs that build sort of social capital at work while having a higher standard of living after work. And in our opinion, this is really the only sector that can address the crisis of the environment. We have a huge need for sustainable energy infrastructure. Everything from wind turbines to solar panels need to be increasingly improved, innovated, designed, manufactured. I mean, one thing I would love to see our kids who come out of Austin Polytech is I want to be the person who can reduce the need for toxic chemicals in production processes. So there's a huge wide variety of points in which innovation and in the manufacturing process can be part of actually cleaning the environment as we go. And so how do we then start to address some of these these problems in our communities, in our economy? That's when we first said, this problem is so big and so complex, we need all these stakeholders at the table to be part of the solution. Like these problems are so big that manufacturers themselves can't solve this as a sector. This is not something government can just say, hey, we're gonna just fix this. We need the business, we need the labor, we need the educators, we need community leaders at the table trying to create the kind of partnerships to create both programs and policy to support advanced manufacturing for the benefit of all of us involved. And so essentially we started in 2005 the Chicago Manufacturing Renaissance Council. And so I just want to turn over to Bill to talk about our most important signature project that came out of the Manufacturing Renaissance Council, Austin Polytech.
So this is Austin Polytech. This is a demonstration project. This is a high school. So these are, but we still utilize this same model of let's bring government into it, let's bring manufacturing into it. I like to tell people, I owned a Cardi die casting before I sold it to my son for over 20 years, and nobody once came from a high school and said, hey, let me show this to my kids, because, but you know what else? I never went into a school and said, hey, let me come into the school and explain what manufacturing can do for what kind of careers are available. So, so much of it is building those bridges for these entities to come together. We are a public high school. We're in an African American community. We have multiple paths for the students to consider moving in their career. We want to talk about skilled positions. We want to talk about management, but we also want to talk about ownership. We want the kids to start thinking, hey, I could own a company. One of the little sections when the kids are figuring out where they want to go for a job shadow is capital formation. They come to me and they say, Mr. Vogel, what's capital formation? Well, how do you go about that? But if you don't think that you can own your own company when you're in high school, you know what? Chances are it's going to be harder for you to own your own company. So exposure to orientation, career readiness. Now this is where we talk about soft skills. These, of the 60 partners we have, they are more concerned about those essential skills. I don't like the term soft skills, but everybody uses it, but we're trying to change that to essential skills. Yes, you got to be there. You got to have the right kind of an attitude. You got to be dressed appropriately. You can't show up in sandals if they said you got to have a steel-toed shoe, you know. Those are the things that it takes to be successful. We go through developing, we have leadership development programs. We have a career placement program where we work with the students individually, and one of the things that's most unique about our school, besides those 60 partners, is the fact that when the students graduate, we don't say goodbye. We say, hey, we're here for you. We have an alumni association, we call it APALUM, APA alum, and hey, if it doesn't work out in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and you come back home, you can come here and we'll help you find a job in manufacturing that suits you. Or if your first job, I had one kid that came to me that's working at Zenith Manufacturing in an assembly position right now. He said, you know, I worked at Walmart and, you know, it just got boring. I mean, when it got slow, there was just nothing to do. He wanted a job where he could be working and where he could be making something. So, so this is that slide that I wanted you to see that has different kind of paths. And we work with the kids individually because there is college prep and there is career prep. Now, our country is wrong. We in our country still think of it as either one or the other, but it isn't. It's both. You got to be thinking of both all the time. So we say if you're going to go to college full-time, then you need to be thinking about how that is going to involve your career. If you're going to college full-time and working part-time, that's another way to develop your career. If you're going to work full-time and go to college part-time, that you have to especially concern yourself with where is your continuing education taking you. And if you're working full-time, you've got to start thinking about you adding the component of continuing education. So we do have graduates in each of those boxes. You want to say something here, boss?
Well, yeah, and I just wanted to make a point too that this is really about expanding options. A lot of people think like you're limiting them, you know, by having them only focus on manufacturing. But the reality is, we have by having a discipline, by having these marketable skills where there's a real opportunity for them to develop, it expands the opportunities, because not only do most of our students who are or graduates who are working full time, they're working for companies that will actually pay for them to continue their education. So this is, I mean, for a student who otherwise wouldn't have much financial options, this is, you know, they have more of a chance of going to college than some of our kids who go straight to college do, in terms of finishing college, I should say. And likewise so again, and we even have students who are working full time in manufacturing now, but now they have the kind of job where they can pay their way to study whatever they want. We have like one young lady, Asia Collier, who is studying. And the great thing, it's not mutually exclusive. She loves her manufacturing job, but now she goes to school at night studying to be a nurse, because that's her dream. And now she can do that. She has the means to do that. So, you know, it's really important for us to really dispel that myth that this idea of tracking and that kids are going, oh, they're going to be stuck here. It's like, no. This actually creates more opportunities than they would have otherwise. And so that's a really important point. And then the next slide, just of this represents maybe a traditional pathway that we can imagine within manufacturing explicitly. Skilled production, you know, based on what they get out of Austin Polytech with the NIMS credentials, the nationally recognized machining credentials, they can jump right into a job as a high school graduate because of that credential, making a pretty decent living. You know, add some post-secondary, some college, they can get on an engineering career path, and of course, as they get experience, and maybe some business degrees. They can go up into management, and of course, like I said, we want to really make sure that they understand the opportunity in becoming an owner themselves.
We do have students that within a year are making $50,000 a year. We have graduates that are making that kind of money right now. You talk about this one. I like this. This is one of my favorite slides.
This is just a slide I made, just, again, another way that we talk to students about what this unique experience that they're getting at Austin Polytech allows them to do. And so this is our little tree of Polytech career paths. And so, of course, with the roots being, the critical foundational skills, but what they get to do, of course, applies directly to careers in production and related management. But it also, and like I just mentioned, it's a pathway into engineering careers, but also this idea of entrepreneurship. And this is like anytime these kids go to a job shadow, they're not just job shadowing the engineer or the machinist. A lot of times our kids are job shadowing the president of the company. And so it's learning about how to run a small business. And so this is a critical, unique kind of insight that most young people who, even if they're studying some sort of business program in high school, it's like, oh, how do you sell t-shirts, or how do like this is like a real small business that and all the kinds of things related to that. But we also talk about manufacturing careers in terms of like what me and Bill do. It's a manufacturing career. So we're talking as broadly as possible, and the importance, and even more so now, do we need people who are sort of well-versed and well-grounded in manufacturing to be part of making policy and working in government and all those levels in government. A manufacturing career includes being a doctor in nanotechnology. It includes the full scale of what's possible and what we need people working in research labs. Patent law. We actually had a program, a partnership with John Marshall Law School, which has a great intellectual property rights program. So we had kids learning about, which is also an important part of innovation in technology, is intellectual property rights. And education is a huge need. One of our biggest challenges is finding really good machining instructors or CTE teachers. They're really hard to find, and so I would love Austin Polytech graduates to say, hey, I want to be an engineering teacher, I want to be a machine shop teacher, or I want to be a math or even a history teacher that can really bring contextualize Common Core standards into be applied. And so, of course, and then with the values piece, for me, it's all about, like, regardless of which, branch that you choose, that it's really about making a contribution to your community and, making...
And it is hugely rewarding when we have kids that come back and say, Mr. Vogel, I am going to own a company, and I'm going to own it right here in Austin. That I'm not, hey, Mr. Vogel, I'm going to get rich and I'm going to move to
right.
suburban Connecticut because I'm going to be working at Wall Street, It's so these are some examples of kids. There's Asia Collier. DeQuan is down at SIU. He works at Hudson Precision, both in the summertime and during Christmas time. Alex West, Trevon. Part of as you guys, as urban planners, as you think about it, one of the great things about manufacturing, it has a place for a lot of different people. Trevon is an outstanding individual. He is the slowest kid on earth. Now, I don't mean he is slow mentally. He is just slow, I can walk faster than he can walk, almost. But he is a great human being, and he is working in manufacturing. There are some companies that would just dismiss him out of hand because it takes him so long to fill out the application. But manufacturing can see, I think, into an individual's capability, especially small manufacturers. Rakeem works for a company named Pashi Airbrush. Pashi Airbrush makes airbrushes. There's about 45. They're up close to Wright College. So he's been working there now a year and a half.
Yeah, almost.
almost 2 years, and he's had 2 pay increases and 1 promotion. And I took that picture. I'm so proud of that picture.
I know, you did good.
Because my boss says I'm a lousy picture taker. I always point to that one. So, and I said, I asked him, I said, well, where do you think you might go? He says, well, I still like the idea of being an architect, but I could really see myself as being a shift leader here at Pashy Airbrush. Now, I've got this other little story to tell you about Rakim. He lives with his grandma in Austin. His mom lives down in Champaign. And there's a tradition at the company that for your department, you buy, on your birthday, you buy rolls or a pizza or something like that. Well, Rakim likes his job so much that he wanted to buy pizza for the entire company, all the departments and the office. So I asked Rakim, I said, well, how much did that cost? He says, it was about 1/3 of a paycheck to do that. But this is exciting kind of stuff when people want to give back right away. Rakim now is pushing us to have a reunion, a Christmas reunion party. So we want you guys to talk. These are some other people. There's terrific stories. This is Stranger. Stranger is the one that's making over $50,000 a year. And
these stories in particular, really get at. Stranger was near the top of her class, her graduating class, and she went straight into college, ended up transferring, it didn't work out, financial aid fell through, and she would be this example of this really bright kid who would fall through the cracks just because life happens, and things just sometimes don't work out. But because of her experience and the legitimate skills that she had, when she came back to see if, hey, we hear about anything, we were able to help her relatively quickly because she had skills that manufacturers need. And so now she's working full time and she intends to go back to college, but now it's nice to make a little money for a little bit, And so the school really is about, of course, the short term, that was a requisite for us doing this work, was we need to show that kids can get jobs with these skills. That is essential part. But that's really not the only goal. It can't be. That's the short-term goal. The long-term goal is, can we set up this school such that it becomes a catalyst for economic development, in the broader community? And so one way is, and so we've really been making, progress in that. And so one example is we raised funding from the manufacturing, for many of the manufacturers we work with. So we actually do have, state-of-the-art machining facility at the school that our high school students use, but now in the last couple of years we've opened it for adult training classes in the evenings, and so that's a really important. So we are now, so in a very similar curriculums, adults, what the students learn over 2 years in high school, the adults can learn in 10 months, and then we work with them in job placements. So being able to open this as a resource to the broader community is really critical. We also are now in the process of starting, this is sort of my favorite project, one of my favorite projects is Met Creations. We actually now have a group of students who are we're starting a student co-op, a student manufacturing co-op at the school. So we have a group of students who we've been working with, and some different challenges, but we have a business plan, and we actually are going to be manufacturing trumpet mouthpieces, and that's a longer story, but I'd be happy to share that. But that's a really exciting of, again, it's not just about, hey, can you work somebody else's machine, but, how do we start our own businesses? And then we're also pretty exciting around, and it's actually moving much quicker than we could have ever hoped for, but we are actually in the process of developing an Austin Manufacturing Innovation District on the west side. So, and really and even though Austin Polytech is a small school, we only have 200 students in the high school, but the fact that we represent sort of a building infrastructure, the fact that we exist is, we're not by no means the only reason, or even the top 5 reasons why companies are considering moving to Chicago, but it is an important factor that we can really point to, and that we are in the process of expanding citywide. So we actually right now have signed memos of understanding with about 10 companies who are interested in moving into the west side of Chicago, and this would be the first time this has happened in 3 decades. So it's a really exciting prospect, and actually we are positioned to have a site built out. We have a variety of partners, the city is involved, and we're actually, and actually the Brock site that I talked about earlier is actually now being torn down, and that's going to be the location for this innovation park. And there's enough interest that we could have a few sites around the west side of Chicago, and they would bring, in the next 2 to 5 years, up to around 500 jobs. And we're, now we're a little bit running scared because we're like, it won't be all APA graduates, obviously, but so we're now working really, as we have been all along, but the pace has to pick up a little bit in terms of making sure that we're fully networked with city colleges, other training providers, and that we're making sure that Austin residents are the ones positioning to get these jobs. Because, frankly, that is a recipe for gentrification. Without education, jobs that come in, that's why people get displaced, because the people who work in that community where those jobs are can't get those jobs. We're trying to, but because we have sort of an educational infrastructure, we can now essentially guarantee that Austin residents can be positioned to be the ones to get these new jobs that come in to the area, which is really exciting. And of course, along with it is a whole opportunity for community benefits agreements. So we are working really diligently with the Chicago Federation of Labor about how to make sure, okay, the construction jobs, that, making sure it's Austin residents getting these constructions, the short-term jobs. And then of course we have a plan of really thinking about, this broader supply chain. Who are the other entities that can really benefit from these economic opportunities, and making sure that locally owned businesses, existing ones as well as starting new ones, and hopefully, and actually we're partnering with a group called the Center for Workplace Democracy to actually do some workforce development, but specifically around cooperative development. And how can we get people really figuring out how to start cooperatively structured businesses that could articulate with this kind of facility. So it's really exciting. So in a nutshell, how do we make Chicago a global leader in advanced manufacturing with communities like Austin leading the way? Because it's not about just benefiting manufacturers, right? It's really about benefiting and building community and fostering community-driven economic development. That the work that we're doing is, in fact, positioning Austin to be able to kind of play a leading role, as opposed to another have to endure whatever development comes to and over them. And then we are in the process of sort of building the national manufacturing renaissance. We have about half a dozen cities, areas, regions around the country. We have staff this week in Mobile, Alabama. There's a really, strong interest and good chance that we'll be starting a manufacturing renaissance council there in conjunction with a high school project. We're working in Detroit. Stuff going on in the Bay Area, Oakland, New York. So it's really exciting, and we by no means call Austin Polytech the model, because there's a lot of things that we would definitely not do again. But I think through our experience, we've sort of distilled the kind of the recipe. We have a really good idea like what works and what should be replicated elsewhere. So we've sort of started to call this sort of recipe the Polytechnical model of education. And there's things that we've done really well at Austin Polytech, and things that we know need to be done way better than aren't being done currently, but we're working on it. And then of course, it's really about engaging all communities around this concept of building sustainable communities. So there are a lot of issues and things that we've learned that have been both, strategic opportunities, but have been real challenges sort of simultaneously. This list is by no means comprehensive, but I think for the purposes of today, it's enough. But some lessons that we're learned and that we're learning is really around this idea of community development really requires both redistribution of wealth and wealth creation strategies. Well, Bill, help you.
Well, this wealth factor is a big factor. Mm-hmm. I bring in Forbes. Kenny Plymouth wants to see those 400 wealthiest families, and where did their wealth come from, and how did they get it, and so thinking about wealth creation for the community and feeling that you, me, Kenny Plymouth, can decide how to create wealth, that the community can decide how to create wealth. Now, we want to talk just a minute about privately held manufacturers and educators. They must come together. I have worked with Caterpillar Tractor, I have worked with Johnson Controls, I have worked with ArcelorMittal. I mentioned that we just had Ford in the other day. When you're involved in your urban planning efforts, those big guys are tough, you know. If you want to make something happen, go to the guys that can make something happen. And the great thing about the small manufacturers is you can get to the president of the company who can decide, yeah. Workforce development, manufacturing has just come through getting pretty good at incumbent worker training. Now workforce development is a new thing for them, and they've got to develop that. Inspiring and fostering this idea of entrepreneurship, ownership. How do I get ownership? How can I be working and still get an ownership position in my company? What new ideas can I make happen? And then this is there, you know, you don't have to worry about this part of your career if you're a student. If you're a faculty member, you've already gone through it. People are going to tell you you can't do it and you're doing it wrong and you got, you know. So getting used to learning to deal with cynicism.
And also, and also in particular, like, you know, when we first started this, and you know, and this is, it's not like we fixed it or anything, like it's still an active factor. You know, for example, educators were, manufacturers, for example, were very, public, you know, working with the public school district was, no, we want nothing to do with public schools. But, you know, but again, we said, you know, but really engaging them directly, it's like, listen, and that's the other, you know, the opportunity with small manufacturers, they don't have the wherewithal to roam the world finding cheap labor pools. They really are sort of, whether they like it or not, frankly, committed to their communities, dependent on the local public school system to educate their employees. And so there's sort of a fundamental alliance there that there's been a reluctance to really tap into. And because of the perception of public schools, and then vice versa. When we first went to, I mean, even though we had support from the high up in Chicago Public Schools when we started this, and actually it was Arnie Duncan who said, yeah, you guys should, you know, we need this idea in our schools district and whatnot. But when we got to the grassroots of the teachers and even the principals that we were working with, they were like, manufacturing? Who cares about manufacturing? So there was a real like, we have nothing to do with that stuff out there. And it's like, and so we've had to overcome that sort of cynicism of like, and from every side, from the community, you know, like there's these knee-jerk kind of responses just based on legitimate legacies of racism and tracking young people into menial employment. I mean, that's there. But we also had to sort of address it directly and say, listen, there's an opportunity here that if we work together on, we can sort of all kind of come out in a way that benefits everybody involved. And so fundamental to this work has really been engaging that cynicism and winning people over. It's directly engaging those kinds of, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole and say, nope, but that's where we have to go. We have to resolve this and move on.
So we want to listen and hear your ideas. Here, boss, you sit down.
Thanks.
Well, let's first give her a round of applause.
Yeah.
Austin Polytech been an independent entity?
It's a Chicago public school.
Since 2007, that's when I opened.
Okay, and how long has Manufacturing Renaissance been a part of that?
So we started it. We so essentially what we did while we were when we formed the Chicago Manufacturing Renaissance Council in 2005, part of the building the leadership for that, and, you know, we wanted to have education at the table, and so we went to the top educator around at the time, which was Arnie Duncan, who was chief of schools, and said, hey, you need to be involved in this problem-solving effort, and it was right in the middle of his Renaissance 2010 process, which, you know, very controversial for all kinds of good reasons. But he essentially recruited us to say, yeah, this is really good stuff. You guys should start a school. We had no interest in running the school because we weren't educators, and but he convinced us to that we could convene a design team of educators and manufacturers, and so that's what we did. We convened the design team, and, you know, okay, what would a modern high school with a meaningful link to manufacturing look like? And so Austin Polytech was the result of that.
So we founded the school, Manufacturing Renaissance, founded the school. We now have 5 people that are employed by Manufacturing Renaissance working in the career department, none of whom were employed by Manufacturing Renaissance when the school was founded.
So we're sort of embedded within the school. It is, it is a really good example of that private-public partnership in terms of the school is operated, you know, by the district. The teachers are all in the Chicago Teachers Union, and we have no legal authority over the school in any way, but we have this sort of, you know, the school relies on us to actually run their career program. And so we have an office in the school, we all work there every day, and we work closely. We find a variety of ways, dozens of ways to collaborate with teachers and administrators to run all kinds of things.
So,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Just want to say it's a really interesting talk. Like, I heard about you guys before.
Oh, great.
I actually was really curious about certain things. It was good to hear that you guys have this enforcement model
Yeah,
things. But something that like Father and when he was doing it was to really emphasize voting ownership
Yeah.
and democratic participation.
That's right.
So I'm just curious, is there a component within the manufacturing work where you guys try to engage in the students and the youth in terms of how to have a say in terms of what type of education program should be implemented in the school? And if they also have a process for having students try to say whether they could try to give an opinion of what type of business they have.
That's, yeah.
And I was thinking about the co-op, the part that you guys are talking about.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So so for us, I mean, like you said, those two components that Arizmendi sort of, for us, the third and equal component of sort of why Mondragon was successful was because of the focus on manufacturing. So for us, that was equal to or I guess is as fundamental as the democratic and co-op ownership. So for us, in the context of sort of the opportunity that we had here in Chicago, for us, it was really important that we needed to make sure that, even though we sort of shared those values, but we needed to make sure the manufacturing piece was real. Like, we needed to lead with that and so that we could get the engagement from the private sector, who may or may not be, you know, involved in cooperative type, you know, so to be honest, and, you know, and for me, that was part of the reason I was so inspired to participate in this work. And that's why Met Creations, for me, is that opportunity. So, and there's a lot of challenges. I would have loved the school to reflect that more explicitly since day one, but because of a lot of the internal challenges we have with Chicago Public Schools, we were lucky that we could even maintain the manufacturing program. So it's really only been in the last 2 years because of us that we're now starting this cooperative initiative. So we're now trying to build that, and that's a real commitment. I mean, that's a real thing I'm really committed to really make that piece more visible, because for me, that is fundamental. That's why partners like the Center for Workplace Democracy is such an important partner for me, because, you know, again, we just couldn't do everything simultaneously, and we made those decisions to start someplace and then grow. So we don't have yet, and I would love that's one thing I would love the teachers to want to lead that piece, because that was another thing. And, you know, it's like, who are you guys, and who are you to say how we run, you know? Oh my God, I have scars on my back, you know, from lots of battles and you picking your battles. So in the future, I hope as teachers really understand, because there was a lot of cynicism from the teachers to us, like, who are you guys? Who cares about manufacturing, and what are you trying to do with our kids? So we didn't have, you know, it wasn't like we were all arm in arm from day one, you know, skipping through running the school together. But my hope is that as teachers are really coming on board, which they are, that we can start to have figure out a way to start those other programs, because I think that's critical in the long-term development. So, but Met Creations is my little effort to kind of start that, because when people see it, then they're like, oh yeah, that's really cool. Even though we've been talking about it all along, but they need to see an example of it. So that's what Met Creations represents.
And I gotta tell them this is a
Yeah.
corollary factor, but it is very central to our school. NIMS, that, you know what that is? National Institute for Metalworking Skills?
It gets training in like well-being and.
Well, it's
Well,
machining
you know,
particularly.
it's machining, but there's over 53 credentials that can be obtained. Our program, actually funded by us, teaches the kids how to obtain a NIMS credential. And we have, I believe, 151, or is it 154?
Yeah, 154.
Students thus far in 3 graduating classes have obtained, I think, 224, right at that.
Right.
About 224 NIMS credentials. Now, Obama talks about when you graduate, you ought to get a diploma and a credential. That is going to be the future, you know. So when these NIMS credentials are not, these are adult credentials. These are professional credentials. So the fact that a high school kid has got 2 or 3 of them under his belt, it opens so many doors for them, as well as, I'll tell you, when they get that first NIMS credential, they come in and say, hey, look at this, I got it. You know, there is a self, it builds oneself up. But that's important to understand about our school.
To what extent is manufacturing integrated with the rest of the curriculum at the school? Is it considered to be almost an add-on to your curriculum, or is it integrated into history, math, science?
You know, it's that's a very good question, and we call it contextual learning. And our school does better in math than we're in the top 20 of math improvement, not the top 20, but math improvement in large part because what they learn in trigonometry they employ in the machine shop. So we think that is a major factor. It is our effort to completely integrate it. I love this picture. We have field trips. We call them contextual learning field trips. You know, here's a picture of the kids out. This is out in Aero Gear, and they've got their clipboard questions. They are graded on what they learn. There's a pre-field trip program, and there's a debriefing after that. So in English, for example, our English teacher has used mock interviews, and somebody's come in from an HR department, and so how to interview, so that's part of her program. So it is our effort, and we're getting better at really integrating it completely.
And that's been part of the challenge of building the culture there, because that was always our intention. It was like, yeah, we need to, you know, every class needs to have a way that it articulates with sort of the manufacturing in some way, because again, this is about developing sort of critical thinking skills, and, you know, students really come with a complex understanding of the you know, the history of manufacturing and all these sort of, we were talking about innovation and whatnot. But again, there was a lot of resistance from the teachers when we first started, because they're like, I'm the English teacher, I don't care anything about manufacturing, I have nothing to do with it. But we've built it over time, so so like with the field trips especially, it's been a great opportunity. So as the teachers themselves have experience at manufacturing via these field trips, and they're like, oh, like when we take them to a place like Winslow Lear, like we showed you before, I mean, for me, that's my favorite part, when the teachers and their eyes get real big, because they had no idea. And so from there, that's when we talk about, okay, so in preparing for the field trip, you know, so over the years, we now have a pretty extensive, we're kind of expanding the integration out from the field trip. Before it was just like field trip, But now there's a lead up to it that's integrated with the lesson, and a debrief. So it's all integrated now. When we do field trips, it's all integrated into whatever the lesson is, and we're intentional about making sure that we're inviting not just the engineering teachers to go on these field trips, but the Spanish teacher, the history teacher, and they find really unique ways of making connections.
Important lady here.
One of my favorite stories is a story about the young man who competed in the statewide.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell that quickly?
Yeah, no, so Kenny Plymouth is one of our seniors, and so we have one of our leadership development initiatives is Skills USA, which is this sort of national network, and it really is about developing leadership in context of sort of in the world of work. And we've had a chapter at Austin Polytech since the beginning, and they have these statewide competitions, and like 80 different competitions, mostly vocational, but they have things like public speaking and job interview competitions, which is what we've done mostly. But this last year was the first time we had a student who competed in the technical competition, which was CNC machining and programming. And so this was the first time we sent a student, Kenny Plymouth, trained for about 6 months preparing for this. And it turned out he came in first place in the statewide machining competition. And this is the first time a kid from Chicago has won that competition. So this was just back in May. So it was a really, because we've had, like, as a school, a lot of challenges. And yeah, I mean, the school is on academic probation, for example. But the fact that, we built such a high quality program that so it was like a testament that our kids really are getting the best, career preparation. So as we continue to work on the academic issues, which we are, and actually that's another issue, like we've had 4 principals in the last 5 years as a sort of an indicator of some of the challenges we've had to deal with. So it was great when we had this, when Kenny triumphantly came home with this gold medal, because it was like, yes, it's like for all of our challenges, we're on the right path, we're doing something right. And so it's exciting. So he really represents sort of, and it's not just, and he's sort of in love with this idea. I mean, he really sees machining as, he's a great kid, but he'll say things like, poetic things like, it's a playground for his mind, and it's like, where did you come from, kid? Like, he's great. But anyways, so we have these great examples now of kids who really embodied, like, not only the technical prowess, but also just the philosophical, underpinnings of how important this is to our community and our society.
Are you all a public school under the charter school model, or just?
Nope, it's straight up public school. So yeah, and actually that was a really important, that was a sticking point, because actually Arnie Duncan wanted us to be a charter school, but because of the work of creating the coalition around the Chicago Manufacturing Renaissance Council with labor, the Chicago Teachers Union was on the design team for Austin Polytech. So it's like there was no way we were going to do a charter, because at that time, charter definitely meant non-union school. We're not fundamentally opposed to it now, because, now a lot of charters are being unionized, but at the time it was a really important point that was defended actually by our business partners on the Renaissance Council. It was the president of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, which is a notoriously Republican, right-wing kind of organization. He told Arnie Duncan, we're not doing this school unless it's in partnership with the Chicago Federation of Labor and Teachers Union, because they understood the value of having that kind of partnership, really, because again, and actually Austin Polytech wouldn't exist without that alliance, because, there's been many points in time where things, things happened that we had sort of this advocate, this sort of powerful group of advocates, whether from the union side or from the labor or business side, that we could sort of count on to advocate on our behalf on higher levels than we would otherwise have access to. So it was actually really important. And again, and not even around philosophical opinions, but just issue of scale. We were never interested in having a boutique little school on the side over here, because of the problems that we had sort of identified through our research. We were looking at, the baby boomers are retiring, and there's not enough people to begin with, and we need to figure out a way to rapidly ramp up this type of program. And so actually when we started Austin Polytech, it was explicitly with the understanding with Chicago Public Schools that, hey, okay, we'll start with one school, but you guys need to figure out how to do 4, 5, 6 of these schools around the city. And actually we're just now you know, 6 years later, now we're finally at a point where we're starting to do that. We're actually identifying schools on the south side
And I want to make a point about
Yeah.
charter schools, you know.
Right.
I think charter schools are here to stay, but charter schools come in and they go, we're going to show you how to do this, you know. And so if you're a KIPP, have you ever been in a KIPP grade school? Huh? Those kids, I'll tell you, they know how to stand in line. Now, I don't know if, now I know that if you don't stand in line, you don't go to that school. So our position is kind of being inclusive, you know. So, you know, we feel you get ahead better as a society bringing people in
That's right.
than pushing people
And
out.
building on existing infrastructure as opposed to recreating wheels and things like that.
You had a question.
Sure, and actually you just kind of segued into it nicely. So you talked about your expansion, like what's next.
Yeah.
You talked about doing some national work, but I'm wondering if you have thought about the suburbs. I mean, I know the suburbs is like a dirty word in manufacturing
No,
industry
no.
or whatever. But
That's where most of our companies are. I mean,
Right.
that's the reality
and
of.
there's concentrations of low-income communities in the suburbs.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the sky's the limit. I mean, actually, we've been in touch with like Evanston Township High School. You know, I mean, we have a network of, we work with Wheeling and I forgot, Rich East or something. There's a couple schools that we're talking with about potentially, you know, doing some of the programs there. And there's some great, Wheeling is an excellent example of, I mean, they're doing incredible things in manufacturing. But no, I mean, for us, I mean, actually, we want to find a good rural, I mean, one of our goals is actually find a good rural site to do a replication. We're not sure where that is yet, but that, because we want to show that this is viable, urban, suburban, rural, nationwide, and because this is really about building a national infrastructure, you know, educational infrastructure.
And just to kind of clarify, so this isn't an alternative high school to
No.
an existing high school. It is the high school for this neighborhood, and so you still.
It is not a default high school.
It's not a neighborhood school.
Okay.
So although most of our kids come from our neighborhood.
Right.
So how do people come in? I mean, is it like they want to take this program until they get there, or are there other programs available at the school?
So we're officially one of the career academies.
Okay.
So we're under the CTE, Career and Technical Education umbrella. And so just by definition, we're selective enrollment, but we don't have any sort of academic requirements. I mean, our principal and our counselor, I mean, they're clear. It's like we can't serve every kid who comes through our door. But the most important criteria, and we'll take kids, I mean, because most of our kids do come to us significantly below in reading and math where they should be. I mean, most of our freshman class, every freshman class we've had so far, you know, the average reading math level is 4th, 5th grade level. So that's just a reality of the students we serve. But what is critical though is that they understand what they're kind of coming into. There aren't separate tracks in our particular circumstance. All kids are going to be taking 3 to 4 years of engineering. All kids are going to be taking at least 1 year of machining. So this is not something you can opt out of, saying, oh, I don't want to take that class. So it's really important that the student and the parent understands what they're signing up for, and hey, we hope that they actually get excited. You know, we want the kids who, when you take them into the machine shop, their eyes get really big. Like, that's the kid we want. We almost don't care what their grades are because we can build that stuff up. But we want those kids who kind of have that drive. And then you know, we've gotten pretty good at winning kids who, you know, even we've had kids who even they went to our school for 4 years, insisted up and down, they don't want nothing to do with manufacturing. They're out a year and they come back. Can you help me get a manufacturing job? And we can. I mean, because we're like, you have the skills. It doesn't matter whether you, you know, it's like, it's not like a subjective thing. It's like, you have an IMSS credential. We can help you get a job. And that's that simple. So, yeah.
So I have a couple more questions.
Yeah, please.
Do you guys actually have a CNC class within the school that
Yep.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, right.
And the second one is, you guys are reminding me a lot of the old Washburn Trade School.
Mhm.
There was an innovation between public schools, unions,
That's
and
right.
manufacturing. Have you guys thought of, or maybe in the future, their component to also bring in unions to kind of help teach direct employment work?
That, yeah, that would be great, and that's why it's like, you know, we are dependent on our, you know, our union partners to help us figure out how to do that. And so yeah, I mean, that's totally.
The steelworkers have worked with us. The steelworkers have a program called Steel Workers of Tomorrow. It is, in my opinion, the best program out there. It still needs a ways to go. They worked with Ivy Tech, you know Ivy Tech, and they worked with Prairie State.
But that was from Arcelor, that wasn't necessarily from the union, that was driven from Arcelor Middle.
Well, no, but
Right.
it was steel
Okay,
workers
okay,
that,
okay.
you know,
Yeah.
in fact, Rachel,
Right, you're right, yep.
yeah, so,
Yeah.
the key is going to be to build a bridge through, you know, actually down into the grade schools, and to get the parents involved, and then build that through, let's say, a daily college,
Right.
and then build it into Arcelor Middle. You know, that could be hugely exciting, and which is not a lot different than the German models.
And that's why the great thing about our framework is that it can look a lot of different ways depending on who the local partners happen to be. And so that is, yeah, I mean, but the more we can get those intersections, and our whole point is like, and this is what we've been sort of pushing Chicago Public Schools, is like how do we help school districts be more aligned to the real economic opportunity that's happening around them, and to not sort of leave money on the table just because they're not accustomed to working with XYZ group, or, and so, yeah.
Ivy Tech, are you talking about the technical colleges in Indiana?
Right.
Yes. So, now, we had UAW there, and one of the things that CPS is talking to us about is a school on the south side close to Ford. So, UAW and Ford were sitting there at the table together. That's when it really works best, when things,
Right.
you know, kind of come together.
Do you guys do any like incorporation of labor stuff into your other courses, like labor history or politics of labor?
I would love to see that. That hasn't been.
But it could CPS curriculum, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, like I said, we have nothing to do with what classes are taught, I mean, you know, outside of the, but again, I would love to see. And that's what I try to engage teachers on, like, you know, like the history, like, you know, for those teachers who are like, what does history have to do with manufacturing? I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, you know, but I would love to be diplomatic and say, oh, well, actually, we could do a unit on, you know, labor history or the Industrial Revolution, which I thought should be taught anyways, but, you know, whatever, it's all good. Like, I've learned a lot about education the last few years. So, but that's exactly, but it's how do we, you know, because yeah, we are actually now thinking about developing curriculum that is explicitly integrated, Common Core, and contextualized with manufacturing. But really, our approach has been, and then that could be just something that could be as a resource for teachers if they wish, but ideally, it's teachers kind of like, figuring it out based on what they actually need to accomplish in their classes. And then we could be a gopher for assistance, and hey, we love it when a teacher's like, hey, can you help me find a guest speaker? Yes, like, we're all over that kind of stuff, and let's help find resources to kind of
We
reinforce
had one
whatever you're
teacher
doing.
that put together a 10-week manufacturing
Oh yeah, that was
science
really
course.
cool, yeah.
That was really exciting, and she had a baby and left, and I'm happy she had a baby, but I'm sorry she left. Because I would have loved to. It was a terrific course that looked at manufacturing from a macro, not from a macro standpoint, but from a micro standpoint, where it took one particular part that fit into a very sophisticated medical device and said, how does that come to be, and what part does it play?
Having been at UIC for 6 years now, and also I'm a graduate of UIC, one of the things that I'm just astounded by, and it's not just UIC, but it's just, you know, higher ed in general, when you have so many graduates not finding jobs.
Right.
And then you have these companies, many of who you're dealing with, who really want college graduates, you know,
Right.
and so how does that get addressed? I know that we're
Right.
probably a lot more recalcitrant in some ways than the CPS is when it comes to working and preparing people for jobs and coming out and making $80,000, you know, a year.
Yeah, no, and there's a couple levels to that solution, I guess. I mean, the more sort of all-encompassing one is that, how do we, most kids who come to our school, they don't come to our school because they're passionate about starting their manufacturing careers. I mean, it's a real challenge about how do you expose young people to these companies, because these companies exist, but they may not have the flashy sign, and so you walk by them every day and don't realize that there's this totally sophisticated technology company right behind these kind of dusty looking doors. And so there's just a sort of lack of awareness of, and young people just don't have, and so I think the exposure piece is really key. Like, how do we systematically expose middle schoolers, high schoolers, college kids into that, hey, there's this huge ecosystem of these small, sophisticated little companies that need really talented, bright people. And regardless of what your major in college, that this is a landscape for you to develop real skills. So I think part of the work is how do you connect, and that's where we've kind of, our role is sort of, I mean, we are sort of this intermediary, and I think of how do you help institutions like UIC or CPS build bridges to these little ecosystems. And the other layer is, which I think is really interesting, especially on the post-secondary level, is just the way, like engineering in particular, like actually our companies told us as we were designing the school, they're the ones telling us engineering grads are virtually useless to us because they don't know anything about manufacturing. You can be the most talented, sophisticated engineer, student, and fancy blueprints and designs, but if you don't understand how that translates into the constraints of a CNC machine, how do you mass produce this thing? And so also it's all on a more sort of targeted approach of how do you really connect with engineering programs to make sure that there is a real applied element there, so that even though as you're learning the theoretical and the scientific underpinnings of engineering, there's also opportunities to learn the adjustments you need to make in order to fit into, to be useful in a manufacturing. So I think there's a huge opportunity for a variety of partnerships to help bridge those divides, because it's really weird that we have, the United States creates I think of all the engineering graduates, 2/3 of them really represent sort of the theoretical engineering as opposed to the applied engineering. Like in Germany, it's reversed. Like 2/3 of their graduate are sort of the applied, the engineer who can fix everything in your house and then some. Whereas we don't, as a nation, we're really not good at educating that level of applied that really would make a direct connection. But
and I just have to say one thing to your question. I've been in this for 53 years. In the last 53 years, I have not seen anything as economically distraught as manufacturing has been in the last 8 years. Now what has happened, we've turned the corner, and actually manufacturing is leading it out of it. But you know what, so much has changed. The Moriseki, to give you an idea, DMG Moriseki is the largest machine tool company in the world. They spent at the IMTS show $1 million for floor space for 10 days. What?
At the McCormick Place.
At McCormick Place.
Trade show.
They spent $6 million, not including salary, for those 10 days to bring in the equipment. Now, everything that DMG Moriseki makes is metal removal. They start with a big thing and they whittle it away. Moriseki has just built, bringing to this country, their first additive manufacturing machine. That is gigantic change. Now what is that going to, so you people are really sitting at, but you know what, trying to figure, actually there are jobs out there, but you kind of have to invent them yourself. You have to, because they aren't the way they used to be.
And that's true, it's a great opportunity that the 3D printers and the whole maker fair, the maker movement is really creating this. We're trying to figure out a way to more explicitly connect with that, because I think that is also part of that mass movement of people really, discovering how they connect with making things, and in a very, cool, oh look, I made a little battery charger for my cell phone, to like making, artisan or production model thing, but it's all about making things and creating that awareness that, hey, there's a huge opportunity either making your own job or helping companies.
And you had a question, and you know, we need to look at our
Yeah,
time,
yeah, yeah.
because if you don't watch us, we'll have you sitting here
We'll be
till
here all day,
midnight. We love it so much. But you had a question.
No, I was just gonna say that what I love most about your model is just connecting, being really realistic about connecting, you know, workers with jobs and making
Right.
sure that education connects with, you know, a career and a career path and, you know, building the theoretical around the applied, you know,
That's right.
what you're doing. I was just wondering, as far as the replication, are there any plans for replicating this model around different industries other than manufacturing or in other types of ways?
That's a great question. We are definitely open to it, but for us, manufacturing is such a strategic driver for all other types of community benefits, I guess, that for us, that's just our priority. And I think we've definitely had conversations of, oh, this approach can be totally applied to healthcare or other sectors. So we're not like fundamentally opposed to us, but for us, it really is about, we're trying to reduce poverty. You know, we're trying to transform communities, and you know, if we were in an alternate universe and everything I just described came out of ballet dancing, we would be all about ballet dancing. Like that would be the driver for economic development. Then this Austin Polytech would be a ballet dancing school. Everything we do is ballet dancing, and so on. But in this universe, it's manufacturing. So for us, that's important to focus on.
And I also think in this universe, probably there's going to be more intentional dividing up than there is coming out with something one size fits all. Manufacturing is a meritocracy. If you can do it, you're going to get promoted. Healthcare, I don't care how great a job you do as a what's a CNA, certified nursing assistant? Yeah, I don't care how good a job you do, you're never going to be a nurse unless you
Get the credential.
get to. Manufacturing isn't like that. Healthcare, manufacturing is very family friendly. They very much like the idea. We take the parents to the job site and so that the kids can show them around, you know. And the manufacturers love that, you know. If you start out working in the healthcare industry, or if you're working in the retail industry, I guarantee you're going to be working on weekends and you know, odd kind of hours, you know, that. But typically, if you're in manufacturing, you get your shift. Now, you might be on the night shift, but you pretty much get to stay on that night shift. And you, chances are, might have to work some Saturdays, but you probably won't have to work Sundays. So, you know, it's just a difference of the way those industries have developed, and then matching what suits me.
Right.
Well, thank you for this.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Howard. It's been terrific. I'll tell you, you know, few fell asleep. So